Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're unpacking something really special, I think. It's an anthology of graduation speeches the world is waiting for now. And this isn't your typical collection of just, polite farewells. It's actually packed with these really raw, high-demand calls to action. We're talking about speeches from major figures, activists, writers, Toni Morrison, Elie Wiesel, Noam Chomsky, people like that.
Absolutely. And our mission today, well, it's pretty specific. We want to synthesize the core themes, the really enduring ideas that define what you might call the activist's commitment to the next generation. We're trying to distill the wisdom here, understand how a commencement speech can become more than just ceremony, how it turns into this powerful tool for social and political change, often quite uncomfortable change. These speakers are essentially saying, look, you've got your freedom now. Use it. Use it to free others. That's the underlying message.
And the tone gets set right away, doesn't it? There's this foundational idea that just runs through the whole book. It starts with Anna Quindlen, her 2011 speech at Grinnell College. And she does something unexpected. She immediately rejects the expected apology.
Yeah, that's right. She knew what they were probably expecting to hear, right? An apology for the, quote, disaster they were inheriting, the tough job market, the uncertainty, all because of, past mistakes.
But she doesn't give them that.
No easy moment of generational blame. She refuses to apologize. And that right there is a classic activist move. It's a pivot. She doesn't downplay the crisis, not at all, but she reframes it. She shifts the whole narrative from lamenting the past to seeing opportunity. She says point blank, what they're inheriting is an unparalleled opportunity to remake this country so that it is stronger, smarter, and makes a whole lot more sense.
That reframing, wow. It's everything, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just immediately sets up the core mindset we're exploring here. This whole deep dive is really about rejecting resignation. It's forward-looking, it's pragmatic, it forces you, the listener, to see every hurdle, not just as a past failure, but as raw material.
Exactly. Raw material for a better future.
Yeah.
The message is stark. The world's broken. Now it's your job to fix it.
Okay, so with that proactive tone set, the speakers really don't waste any time. They lay out this immediate external call, a call for civic engagement, for justice. You see the urgency just in the titles themselves. Marian Wright Edelman's To All My Children, Theodore Shaw's Don't Wait to Change the World, Chomsky's Who Will Defend the Earth. There's this overwhelming feeling, like the house is on fire and you have to act. It's mandatory.
And what's really crucial to grasp here is how these activist voices define the moral stakes. It's not just about bad laws or policies. They frame societal problems as fundamentally failures of human morality, failures of connection, and they pull this concept, indifference, right into the ethical spotlight.
Indifference.
Yeah.
And when you talk about defining morality through the lens of indifference, you absolutely have to start with Elie Wiesel.
You really do. Wiesel's assertion is just. It's staggering in its simplicity, but also its power. He says the opposite of culture isn't ignorance. The opposite of morality isn't immorality. No. The opposite of morality, he believes, is indifference.
Wow.
And he goes even further. He says indifference is equal to evil. That really forces you to think differently about how we operate psychologically when faced with so much suffering in the world.
It's that constant dilemma, isn't it? If we were truly fully connected to all the suffering out there, the wars, poverty, climate change, we'd be emotionally paralyzed. You couldn't function, right? Couldn't hold down a job, raise kids, have a normal conversation. You'd just be compelled to act constantly, not talk logically.
That's the corrosive truth Wiesel gets at. He knows we can't think about everyone dying all the time. Indifference becomes this coping mechanism, often unintentional, but essential for just getting through the day.
Yeah.
But, and this is the activist point, that very mechanism, that ability to look away, that's what turns a potential helper into, well, an accomplice to the very evils they're ignoring.
So the coping mechanism itself becomes part of the problem.
It becomes worse than the original wound, in their view. Yeah.
That condemnation of systemic indifference, it has such a powerful historical echo in Frederick Douglass's 1852 address, the famous "What to the slave is the 4th of July" speech. He basically used the nation's biggest celebration of freedom to just completely denounce the hypocrisy of a system that allowed and even enforced slavery.
Exactly. And Douglass zeroed in on the institutions that should have been moral guides, especially the church. He described it as being either stupidly blind or most wickedly indifferent. He was absolutely incensed by the church's silence, its complicity, really, regarding the fugitive slave law.
Right. The law that forced citizens to help recapture escaped enslaved people.
Yes. It fundamentally undermined any claim to religious or civil liberty. How could you preach freedom and then participate in that?
And he used that biblical analogy, right, about
hmm
the herbs.
He did, a really powerful one. He argued the church would, raise hell, call for repeal with thunderous passion if the law was about some minor religious detail, the mint, anise, and cumin of ceremony. But when it came to the truly weighty matters, judgment, mercy, and faith, they were silent. They failed to prioritize substance over symbol. It's a timeless critique, really.
Still resonates.
And it highlights what we could call the inconsistency paradox. Douglas saw Americans celebrating freedom, loudly condemning tyrants overseas, hurling anathemas at the crown-headed tyrants of Russia and Austria. But at the same time, they were consenting to be the tools and bodyguards of the tyrants of Virginia and Carolina, upholding these barbaric systems right at home.
That gap between what's said and what's
That's
doing.
the target. That gap is the intellectual and moral bullseye for the activist.
And according to these voices, the only valid response to that kind of gap has to be, well, absolute, moral absolutism. You can't stand halfway. Which brings us to this idea of standing erect. William Lloyd Garrison really embodies this.
Garrison, yeah. His conviction was singular. It was rooted right in the Declaration of Independence. All men created equal, inalienable rights. He held that so absolutely. He famously declared, "I do not know how to espouse freedom and slavery together." For him, it was simple. If the nation wouldn't abolish slavery, then it lost all moral right to even talk about the rights of man. Just stop prating about it.
It wasn't about compromise for him, was it? Or gradual steps?
Not at all. It was black and white. A moral line in the sand. His famous line sums it up. If others chose to go upon all fours, crawling towards some compromise, he chose to stand erect.
That's powerful imagery.
It's the ultimate commitment to principle, right? No compromise. It's the necessary stance, they argue, when you're fighting a system that's literally built on indifference.
Wow. Okay, but maintaining that kind of external fight against such deep-seated indifference, such ingrained hypocrisy, it sounds utterly exhausting. That level of moral absolutism, it must require an incredible internal framework, a deep well of strength.
It absolutely does.
So let's shift focus now. From the external demands of justice, let's look inward. At the internal preparation needed for that kind of sustained activism, this connects directly to what Toni Morrison calls the pursuit of meaningfulness. If you're going to be in this for the long haul, you need resilience built on something, well, unbreakable.
Exactly. And that internal foundation, that resilience, it really starts with this concept of proactivity. The core idea, and you see it woven through the mindset of so many long-term activists, is that our basic nature is to act and not be acted upon. What that means, essentially, is that the activist's very first responsibility is taking total ownership of their response to the world, no matter what the external circumstances are.
Okay, so instead of being reactive, blaming the economy or the political climate, all that external stuff, the circle of concern, as some call it. The proactive approach means you focus all your energy on what you can actually change, your circle of influence.
Precisely. If you just worry about things outside your control, your actual influence tends to shrink. You feel helpless. But if you channel that same energy into actively changing the things you can control, maybe it's your attitude, your skills, your habits, how you treat people right around you well, then your circle of influence starts to expand. And over time, it can actually start pushing back against and changing those bigger concerns. That's the mechanism.
The sources mention a sort of practical test for this, right? The 30-day test challenge.
Yes, that's a great example. For 30 days, the challenge is pretty straightforward. Work only inside your circle of influence. Focus solely on what you can directly affect. And the key here isn't about achieving some huge, world-changing result in just 30 days. Not at all. It's about building inner integrity. By making small commitments to yourself and keeping them consistently, you build trust in your own ability to follow through.
Ah, okay. So it builds self-trust.
Exactly. And that self-trust is what ultimately gives you the courage and strength to accept more of the responsibility for our own lives. You're essentially forging the moral and psychological muscle you need for the long fight of activism.
And you definitely need that muscle, because activism means facing obstacles that often seem, well, just overwhelmingly bleak. Insurmountable even, which leads us to this idea of finding meaning in the struggle itself. It connects to something often called the Stockdale paradox.
Ah, yes, the Stockdale paradox. It's fascinating. It's about holding two seemingly contradictory beliefs at the same time. Admiral James Stockdale, who was a POW in Vietnam for 8 years, he said his survival depended on this mindset. On one hand, he maintained absolute, unwavering faith that he would eventually get out, that they would prevail in the end. Total faith in the ultimate victory. But, and this is crucial at the same time, he confronted the brutal, harsh facts of his current reality every single day, no matter how grim things looked.
Okay, so how does that apply to an activist, someone facing, say, climate change or deep systemic inequality? Those seem pretty grim.
When things are that tough, it's the internal vision that sustains them. Viktor Frankl talked about this too. He believed we don't invent our missions in life, we detect them. It's like the mission finds us.
Detect!
Yeah. And the weight of the suffering, or just the sheer size of the task, it can only really be balanced by that sense of detected responsibility, that calling. So the stocked-up paradox for the activist means holding on to the vision of a just future, that ultimate victory, while also acknowledging very clearly the daily setbacks, the crushing defeats, the hard facts on the ground.
This ability to reframe the struggle, it sounds like the core of that obstacles the way philosophy. The Stoic idea. Problems aren't just roadblocks, they're actually chances. Chances to exercise your character, to do your best work.
Exactly. When adversity hits, the instruction is, turn it around, immediately. If someone hurts you, well, that obstacle is your chance to practice forgiveness if your campaign fails. That obstacle is your chance to practice acceptance, learn what went wrong, face the facts. You see this kind of resilience in historical figures, like Lincoln, his intense personal struggles, including those bouts of severe depression. Ultimately, they weren't seen as just weaknesses. Many argue they actually prepared him, gave him the empathy, the endurance he needed to lead the country through its absolute worst crisis. The obstacle became the way.
But dealing with those external obstacles, that's only half of it, right? You also need to build some kind of emotional armor, protection from internal collapse, from failure. Which brings us to that really critical distinction between guilt and shame. People like Brené Brown have explored this so powerfully.
Oh, this is absolutely essential, a prerequisite for anyone trying to make change long term. The sources strongly caution against tying your self-worth directly to your output, whether that's your art, your product, or your activism. If you do that, you become, as Brown puts it, a prisoner of pleasing, performing, and perfecting. You're just constantly chasing external validation, terrified of messing up.
And shame. Shame is what really stops you in your tracks. Guilt is different.
Totally different. The distinction is vital. Guilt says, I did something bad. And guilt, well, it's manageable. It can actually motivate you to repair things, to make amends.
But shame says.
Shame says, I am bad.
Oof, yeah.
And shame is corrosive. It eats away at the belief that you can actually be better, that you're worthy of contributing, or that you deserve success even after a failure. So if your identity is totally wrapped up in the outcome of your activism, and that effort fails, which it inevitably will sometimes, shame tells you you're fundamentally flawed. You shouldn't have even tried.
So activism demands vulnerability.
It absolutely requires cultivating the courage to be vulnerable, to put your imperfect efforts out there, knowing they might fail, and to keep going anyway. That means you have to separate your core identity from the outcomes, from the wins and losses you'll definitely encounter along the way. Okay, so you build this internal architecture, the courage, the resilience, the sense of purpose, but that has to translate into effective external action, right? Which brings us, naturally, to the activist's most powerful tool, the one highlighted throughout this whole anthology, the voice. I mean, it's a collection of speeches, after all.
Right. And when we talk about the power of the voice for change, you kind of have to go back to that foundational argument among the Greek thinkers about rhetoric. Plato, especially in the Gorgias, he was deeply suspicious of rhetoric, wasn't he? He saw it as just a knack acquired by routine, or worse, pandering, a manipulative trick to bypass truth.
Plato's fear was real. He worried that pure persuasion, totally divorced from any genuine moral understanding or knowledge, was fundamentally dangerous. He thought a smooth talker, someone who knew nothing but sounded good, could easily convince an ignorant audience more effectively than a real expert could.
That sounds familiar.
Doesn't it? So for Plato, the orator had to be taught truth and rightness first. Otherwise, they'd inevitably misuse persuasion, just substituting appearances for reality. A recipe for disaster, in his view.
But then Aristotle came along and offered a more integrated view. He acknowledged the power, but insisted it had to be grounded ethically.
Exactly. Aristotle synthesized things. He said rhetoric is composed of a knowledge of analytics, so logic, and of that part of politics that has to do with types of character, understanding people.
Ah, so that's where we get the classic appeals. Logos, pathos, ethos.
Precisely. Aristotle got that effective persuasion isn't just about a solid argument. Logos. You also have to understand the audience's emotions, their psychology, pathos, what makes them angry, what makes them proud, what triggers contempt. But, and this is absolutely critical, both the logical and emotional appeals have to rest on ethos, the perceived credibility, the character, the trustworthiness of the speaker themselves.
So for an activist to be effective, they need to be seen as having genuine character. That makes sense. Moving forward in time, it seems like some of the most impactful voices achieve that ethos not through complex, fancy oratory, but through, well, radical authenticity, simple, direct communication.
We definitely see that. Take Russell Herman Conwell, the Acres of Diamonds guy. He recognized that really stylized, elaborate speaking could actually push people away, feel alienating. His deliberate goal was to preach so simply that you will not think it preaching, but just that you are listening to a friend. That simplicity wasn't accidental. It was a strategy, a way to bypass the listener's defenses.
And then there's the incredible example of Sojourner Truth, the power of an authentic voice, even without literacy. She was illiterate, yet had this profound impact. Her famous quote sums it up. "I can't read a book, but I can read the people."
Her story is so important for understanding how a message can survive even when the details get messy. We know her most famous speech, "Ain't I a Woman?" Well, it exists in different versions, conflicting versions, heavily edited accounts.
Right. The version most people know wasn't written down until years later.
12 years later, yeah. And it contains phrases like, "Ain't I a woman?" that likely weren't in the original delivery, according to earlier, more reliable reports. But here's the insight. The powerful message, the emotional core of her conviction, that survived. It endured. Even if the exact written text is contested or maybe not perfectly accurate, the essence got through.
That enduring core belief, that sounds like what modern leadership thinkers focus on. The need for activists, for leaders, to start with why. Simon Sinek's idea.
Yes, absolutely. Applying that model to activism is key. Leaders need to communicate their central belief, their cause, the why, before they get into the tactics, the policies, the specifics, the what and the how. The why is the belief system. It's that sense of detected responsibility Frankel talked about. Communicating that why taps into something deeper than just rational agreement. It hits that level of commitment, of faith that you need for real, sustained change.
And preparation is still key, right? The great orators didn't just wing it. Cicero, Quintilian, they stressed knowing your stuff.
Thoroughly. They insisted the speaker must know the entire case inside and out, and crucially, know the lives of the people involved. The Latin phrase captures it. Vita deniceorum qui in causa versantur tota conoscenda est. Basically, the whole life of those involved in the case must finally be known.
Wow.
This is where the ethics of rhetoric meets the practical need for actual substance. You can't just speak on causes unexamined. And that prep extends to delivery too, varying your rhythm, your tone, your structure to match the theme. Pity needs a different voice than a call to arms.
Okay, so you've got the inner resilience. You've honed your authentic voice. The graduates are ready to go out. But the final critical question this anthology really grapples with is, how do you actually measure a successful life? You have voices like Gloria Steinem, Go the Distance, or Paul Hawken, The Earth is Hiring, who clearly emphasize lasting effort, service to others, service to the planet. But there's a pretty strong counterview presented in this collection too, isn't there? Specifically about wealth.
That's right. We absolutely have to look at the alternative perspective, the prosperity-focused view. And that's really exemplified by Russell Herman Conwell again in his Acres of Diamonds speech. Now, this speech is often seen as, a precursor to the prosperity gospel movement, but it has a distinct argument about wealth and responsibility that's worth unpacking.
So tell us about that core paradox Conwell presents. What's the story?
Well, the famous story is about Ali Hafed. He sells his perfectly good, fertile farm because he wants to go search the world for diamonds. He travels far and wide, ends up broke, desperate, and dies in poverty. Meanwhile, back home, the person who bought his farm discovers diamonds, literal acres of diamonds right there under the fields Ali Hafed had abandoned.
Ah, okay. So the moral is...
It's kind of twofold. First, opportunity and wealth are often right under your nose, right within the sound of your voice, as Conwell put it. We often miss what's nearby because we're looking far away.
And this is the second part.
The second part is where Conwell takes it a step further. He directly and unapologetically links wealth creation to moral action, to doing good.
How so? He was pretty blunt about it, wasn't he?
Very blunt. He stated clearly, money is power, and you ought to be reasonably ambitious to have it, because you can do more good with it than you could without it. For Conwell, making a lot of money wasn't inherently selfish. He saw it as a kind of quantitative measure of your positive impact on the world. He literally connected earning a large salary to having the ability to do the most good. His argument was, essentially, if you haven't made substantial money within your community, you probably haven't provided enough value to it.
Hmm. But isn't that exactly what some of the other activist voices seem to be warning against, that kind of material ambition potentially overriding the service principle,
Yeah.
leading back to self-centeredness?
And that is the critical tension. That's what makes this anthology so interesting. It presents these conflicting views side by side. Conwell's argument, if you strip it down, is that wealth provides capacity. Capacity to employ people, capacity to invest in the community, capacity to fund the very activist efforts others are calling for. It's an economic perspective on service.
Okay, so is there a way to bridge that gap between wealth and purpose?
Well, some thinkers try to bridge it with what you could call the service to prosperity model. People like Earl Nightingale talked about this. It's based on the law of mutual exchange. The idea is that your success, your income, is ultimately measured by the quality and quantity of service you render to others. Money becomes the yardstick for that service.
So no man can get rich himself unless he enriches others. That kind of idea.
Exactly that. It attempts to reframe wealth accumulation not as greed, necessarily, but as the natural, quantifiable byproduct of providing genuine, scalable service to the community or the world.
And that service, whether it's through activism or business or whatever,
Mhm.
it still needs to draw on that internal strength, that resilience we talked about earlier.
Absolutely. It all connects back.
Yeah.
There's a call in these sources to shift away from being self-centered, where your sense of security is constantly changing based on, market fluctuations or what other people think of you, and towards becoming principle-centered, centering your life on core, unchanging ethical principles, things like integrity, service, contribution, fairness. When you're centered on those principles, the argument goes, it provides consistent guidance, wisdom, and power for sustained long-term contribution. Whether you end up being a wealthy philanthropist or a grassroots organizer doesn't change the core principles.
Ultimately, though, many of the activist voices in the collection seem to define the real measure of success, not in individual terms, wealth or power, but in collective terms, community. Kurt Vonnegut really drives this home with his characteristically pragmatic, humanist advice.
Yeah, Vonnegut cuts right through all the career noise. He told graduates that for most of them, their essential destiny, looking back, will prove to have been building or strengthening your communities. That's the ultimate activist goal, isn't it? Stable, healthy, connected communities. And he even summarized what we should ultimately live for. He channeled Mark Twain, saying it boils down to just 6 words that ought to satisfy you.
And those 6 words are?
I've had a perfectly wonderful time.
Huh.
Simple, but profound, right? His suggestion is that living a life genuinely connected to strengthening your community, that's inherently meaningful enough. That feeling, looking back, that should be your final judgment on whether it was a successful life. Hashtag tag outro. So when we pull back and look at this whole deep dive, this entire anthology, what it really reveals is the absolute necessity of a transition. A shift from just being a consumer of knowledge, a recipient of education or privilege, to becoming an active, intentional participant. Someone engaged in actually improving the world around you. Toni Morrison implies it, right? Use your earned freedom to free others. And Isabel Wilkerson just says it directly. Make this world a better place.
That pretty much sums up the mission.
Yeah, it's a direct call to you, the listener. Take whatever preparation you have, your education, your experience, your skills, and translate that into a lived commitment. Reject indifference. Choose action. And as we wrap up, let's return one last time to Elie Wiesel, because he leaves us with a final, really provocative thought about the immense challenge that comes with that lifelong commitment. It's the burden of witness. Wiesel spoke about this terrible dilemma he felt. He desperately wanted future generations to remember the Holocaust, the suffering. But he also knew they couldn't truly recall it, not having lived it. He agonized over those he couldn't remember himself, the millions who died anonymously without a voice to record their story.
So the ultimate responsibility, it goes beyond just remembering the facts, the history that was written down.
Yes. It's about remembering, as Wiesel put it, the words that nobody uttered, the thoughts, the prayers, the hopes, the despairing calls for meaning, the unrecorded suffering.
Wow, that's heavy.
It is. So we'll leave you, the listener, with this final challenge. It really synthesizes the whole ethos of this collection. How do you become a custodian of a tale you never witnessed, making sure the unremembered suffering and unspoken truth of the past inform your active service in the future? That, perhaps, is the real work waiting for you in the world.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the Anthology of Activism. We'll see you next time.